this threatens to inject a rather somber note in tonight's revelries, but I'll at least get the egg timer right. Here we are. Sometimes something happens in people's lives, an event so important that it cries out for some sort of physical movement or change. 3 years ago, I made a journey into Western Tibet, following the deaths of the last of my family. With the passing of my father, my mother, my sister, I found myself pursuing a kind of rather sad pilgrimage of mourning, you might say, climbing the great valley of the Karnali River, which is the highest source of the Ganges, into a land of ancient sanctity. In the very most early and revered Hindu scriptures, a magic mountain appears. It rotates, or at the center of the axis of all creation, ascends countless miles to the palace of Brahma, who's the greatest and the most remote of the Hindu gods. And at its foot, there emerge the 4 rivers that nourish the whole earth. And everything there on its banks, everything created, human beings, animals, plants, rocks, finds its kind of blueprint. Well, in time, this mythic peak became associated with an actual earthly mountain, a mountain that lies a little bit to the north of the main body of the Himalaya, in a site of almost eerie beauty. People then, when they were seeking out the source of all the great rivers of India, the Sutlej, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Indus, found to their astonishment, when they found their sources, that all of them rose on different cardinal points of Mount Kailash. So people imagine that they discovered the heart of the world in this extraordinary site of lonely majesty. It's sacred now to 1/5 of humankind. All Buddhists and Hindus regard Mount Kailash as the beating heart of the world, a mountain so sacred that it's never been climbed. Imagine, if you can, up by the name of that author there, the Indian subcontinent. To the south, India, in the center, Nepal, the great Himalayan kingdom of Nepal, and to the north, Tibet. And in the far northwest of Nepal, there's an area so remote that there are no roads there. You have to arrive on a little twin-otter aircraft, and it dumps you down in a place called Simikot, a sort of one-horse town. And there, if you're lucky, you meet your Sherpa and your cook and your horseman. It's the kind of minimum retinue for these rather Raj-like expeditions into the Himalaya. And I found myself taking off for about a week northward up the great Karnali Valley towards Tibet. It's a most magnificent valley filled with giant trees, hemlocks, firs, and cedars. And I stayed, when I could, with families, Nepalese and Buddhists and Hindus along the way. It's a site already now of great beauty and of safety. A few years ago, it was overrun and plagued by Maoist guerrillas who left 13,000 dead. But they had gone at least a couple of years before I was there. And the only danger voiced by my Sherpa came as we were hoping to stay with a family there. At least I was. And he said in his rather quaint English, "We stay with family, you will die here." I said, "Why should I die here? The Maoists have gone," and so on. And he said, "I did not say die here. I said you will diarrhea." Well, we did diarrhea, of course. But at 13,000 feet, we found ourselves crossing the border into Chinese-occupied Tibet. And even on this tiny footpath, we were met by Chinese soldiers and officials rummaging through my backpack, above all, for pictures of the Dalai Lama. You could tell by the sheer bearing of these men that they believed they were bringing civilization to a country they thought barbarous, bringing all the infrastructure of modern civilization, of health benefits, education, civil service. And clearly, this country to them was little more than a sort of sink of feudal serfs with a life expectation of just 36, and its people they thought superstitious, insanitary, drunken, illiterate, and so on. And probably not realizing that by eviscerating the religion of these people, they were killing their heart. The last ordeal of crossing this border, at least on this year, was to be monitored for swine fever. And I remember after having a blood test and so on, I had to fill out a little form, a little questionnaire, which was quaintly translated out of Mandarin into English. The final question being, have you had close relations with pig during 1 week? Well, at last you move into Tibet, if you've been cleared of any relationship with a pig, and find yourself in a land of almost astral beauty, a strange plateau, fearfully eroded, tremendously lonely, solitary. You are, after all, 3 miles above sea level. As I approached Mount Kailash, it was the festival of Sagadawa, and there were some 1,000 pilgrims gathered in the valley under the mountain. It was an extraordinary sight. They were raising up ritually an 80-foot pole covered in prayer flags. And if this pole could be made to be held up vertically, it meant a propitious time for the future for Tibet. If it was leaning a little, it was more ominous. But already the Chinese, even this remote valley, they had infiltrated, and there were some 200 soldiers in riot gear, helmets, batons, riot shields, marching belligerently among the pilgrims. But interestingly, the pilgrims simply didn't see them. They looked straight through them. Of course, these great gatherings are feared by the Chinese. Monks themselves are feared. And it's not entirely without reason. As early as the 14th, 15th centuries, we find that the Buddhist monks, some of their monasteries are kind of armed camps in which they're defending their faith against one another in quite fearful civil wars. And until the early 20th century, the Dalai Lamas, if they weren't murdered in childhood, were complicit in violence. Well, I made friends with a monk back in Kathmandu who said to me that the Western perception of monks is quite different from ours. We, he said, we're emotional. We're not really pacific at all, and we can get very angry. He said, you should see the monks. Yesterday evening, when they were watching football on television, he said, apparently all the monks were, for some reason, followers of Manchester United. And they'd been watching the European Cup, and they got absolutely furious because the referee had given out false, unfair penalty tickets against Manchester United, they thought. And they were throwing things at the television and shouting. And I said I thought the monks were praying in the evening or meditating. And he said, well, perhaps it is a kind of meditation, you know. They watch the ball and the rest of the world goes away. Well, Hindu and Buddhist pilgrims circle the base of Mount Kailash for 33 miles. It takes them some 4 days. The Tibetans will do it in 36 hours. And sometimes the Tibetans will go around the entire mountain prostrating themselves, which, of course, takes them over a month. It's said that a single circuit of that mountain will dispel even the murder of a parent or a priest, a lama. And in the past, a rich person might actually pay a proxy to go around in his place, dividing the merit 50-50. And even now, a pilgrim riding a pony or a yak around the mountain has to divide the merit 50-50 with the animal. Quite right. They go, basically, to accrue merit and to cleanse themselves of sin, and sometimes for perfectly earthly reasons. A blessing, perhaps the birth of a son, the carving of a yak, a better price for their butter. The motives are multitudinous. And it's a strange trajectory of redemption that they're following. Halfway up the mountain pass, there's a cemetery called Shivatsal. It's a cemetery not for bodies, but for clothes. As people go, they throw off a garment in symbol of leaving behind their past life, or they leave a tress of hair or a tooth, and then continue on to the height of the mountain. These clothes and these offerings are given to Yama, the god of death, so that he will hurry them on to a better incarnation when they have died. And people actually come here to rehearse their death. One finds groups of them lying down, perhaps under the tutelage of a holy man. As I was sitting there, a bundle of rags got to its feet. It turned out to be an old man who had been just rehearsing his death. He grinned at me and walked on. So you climb on through a monochrome landscape, icy wind by now, until you're reaching 18,600 feet. I could by now go no more than 10 paces at a time because of lack of oxygen. And of course, altitude sickness is what everybody fears at this altitude, which has no respect of age, gender, fitness. The people who are most hit are the Hindu pilgrims, many of whom come up from the lowlands of India, worshippers of Shiva who have never seen landscape like this. 8 of them died on the mountain while I was there of heart conditions or edema. But finally, at the summit of the pass, there's a vast rock which is sacred to the goddess of compassion, Tara. And it's so covered in prayer flags that you can hardly see it. Great gales come pouring through the pass in winter and topple the poles over them. And you have to kind of part the flags to see on the great rock the sacred symbols emblazoned, or people's hair or teeth attached, or sometimes a splash of blood from a pilgrim leaving a token of his passage. And a huge sense of jubilation comes up. The Hindus are taking prasad, their sacred meal. The monks are praying. The shamans are shouting victory to the gods. But you may ask what, in fact, is being redeemed here. Essentially, it is depersonalized karma. In such a culture, there is no memory and no survival. It's a grander and less intense tradition than our own, I think, in which what matters is not the individual, but the abstract weight of karma, the abstract weight of good or evil, which follows us into the future. A world, moreover, that to Hindus is cyclical. It will return again and again and again. In a celebrated passage of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna addresses Arjuna the archer before battle against some rival monarchs and says, "Thou hast mourned those who should not be mourned, nor at any moment was I not, nor thou, nor these kings, and not at all shall we ever come not to be." So these two warriors pass into battle, and hew men down, one imagines, with those seraphic smiles you see on the faces of Hindu statues, because they know they're killing nothing of importance. In fact, the erasure of the individual is the condition of salvation. My monk in Kathmandu assured me that Buddhism was not a religion. He said, it's not even a philosophy. He said, it's a science. It's a technique of true realization. As he told me, we have no God, we have no soul. This offers little comfort to somebody from a Western tradition. We who wish for recognizable continuance in the life after the grave. But the Buddhists say, from all that he loves, man must part. In happier conclusion, I'll leave you with my first sight of Mount Kailash. I'll have to be quick because the egg timer tells me I'm already hard-boiled. As we climb higher, the sky grows light and thin. Here and there a monastery stands in the wastes, and nomad flocks are grazing on nothing under the far mountains. Then, at 16,000 feet, we crest the Thaladong Pass and come to a stupefied halt. We are gazing on a country of planetary strangeness. Beneath us, in a crescent of depthless silence, a huge lake curves empty out of sight. It is utterly still. In the plateau's barren smoothness, it makes a hard purity, like some elemental carving, and its color is almost shocking, a violent peacock blue. There's no bird or wind-touched shrub to start a sound, and in the cleansed stillness high above, floating on foothills, so faded that it seems isolated in the sky, shines the cone of Mount Kailash. In this heart-stopping moment, pilgrims burst into cries and prayer. There seem no colors left in the world but this bare earth brown, the snows white, and the sheen of mirrored sky. Void of any life, the whole region might have survived from some sacred prehistory, shorn of human complication. We have entered Holy Land. Thank you.